The morning sun was already beating down on the asphalt as David pulled his old Honda into the parking lot of Prestige Motors. He'd driven past this dealership 100 times, always admiring the sleek cars behind the glass windows. But today was different. Today he actually owned the place, though nobody here knew it yet. David stepped out of his car and stretched. He was wearing his usual weekend clothes, nothing fancy. Just a pair of jeans, sneakers, and a plain blue shirt. At 43 years old, he'd learned that comfort mattered more than impressing strangers. Besides, he wanted to see how this place really operated when the staff thought nobody important was watching. The dealership looked impressive from the outside. Tall glass windows reflected the cloudless sky, and inside he could see rows of expensive cars that probably cost more than most people's houses. A massive banner hung across the entrance, advertising their luxury vehicle collection. Everything looked perfect, almost too perfect. As David pushed through the glass doors, a wave of cool, air-conditioned air hit him. The showroom was enormous, with polished marble floors that squeaked under his sneakers. 3 brand-new sports cars sat in the center like pieces of art in a museum. The smell of leather and new car scent filled the air. Soft music played in the background, and several well-dressed salespeople stood in small groups, chatting with each other. David walked slowly toward the nearest car, a beautiful silver sedan with a price tag that made his eyes widen, even though he could afford it 10 times over. He ran his hand along the smooth hood, genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship. This was exactly the kind of inventory he'd hoped to see when he bought the dealership last month. But something felt off. He'd been standing there for almost 5 minutes and not a single person had approached him. The salespeople kept glancing his way, whispering to each other, but nobody came over to help. One guy in a sharp suit actually made eye contact with David, then quickly looked away and walked in the opposite direction. David had seen this before. Too many times, actually. He took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm. He was here to learn, to observe. Getting angry wouldn't help anyone. He moved to another car, a stunning black SUV with cream-colored leather seats. Through the window, he could see the interior was loaded with every feature imaginable. He tried the door handle, but it was locked. Still, nobody came to assist him. A young woman finally started walking his direction. She looked nervous, maybe in her mid-20s with red hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her name tag read Katie. At least someone was willing to acknowledge his presence. "Hi there," she said, her voice uncertain. "Are you looking for someone? Or maybe you need directions?" David smiled at her, appreciating that she at least had the decency to say something. "Actually, I was hoping to look at some of your inventory. Maybe test drive a few models." Katie's eyes darted around the showroom like she was looking for backup. Okay. Which vehicles were you interested in?" Before David could answer, a loud voice cut through the showroom. "Katie, I'll handle this." A tall man in an expensive-looking suit strutted toward them. His hair was perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. Everything about him screamed confidence or maybe arrogance. His name tag identified him as Derek Palmer, General Manager. David recognized the name from the employee files he'd reviewed. Derek positioned himself between David and Katie, effectively dismissing her with just his body language. She stepped back quickly, relief and disappointment mixing on her face. "Good morning, sir," Derek said, though his tone didn't match the polite words. His eyes scanned David from head to toe, lingering on his worn sneakers and casual clothes. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to see what you have available," David replied calmly. "Particularly interested in your premium line." Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I see. Well, our premium inventory is quite exclusive. The vehicles you're looking at start around $120,000. He paused, letting that number hang in the air like a challenge. "We also have a sister location about 15 miles from here that specializes in pre-owned vehicles. More affordable options, you know. Might be worth checking out." David felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice steady. "I appreciate the suggestion, but I'm interested in what you have here." "New vehicles?" Derek's fake smile faded slightly. "Look, friend, I've been in this business for 15 years. I can usually tell what people are shopping for, and honestly, I think you might be more comfortable at our other location. These cars require significant financial resources, and I wouldn't want to waste your time or mine." The showroom had gone quiet. Other customers had stopped talking, sensing the tension. 2 other salespeople watched from across the room, exchanging knowing looks. David noticed Katie standing near the wall, her face flushed with embarrassment. I understand what these cars cost, David said quietly, and I'm prepared to make a purchase today if I find what I'm looking for. Derek laughed, actually laughed like David had told a joke. Sure you are. Tell you what. Why don't you go home, check your budget, maybe talk to your bank? Then if you're serious, come back with documentation and we can have a real conversation. David pulled out his phone and took a picture of Derek's name tag. The manager's expression shifted from condescending to angry. Excuse me, what do you think you're doing? Just making a note, David said calmly. For the new owner. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about the customer service here. Derek's face reddened. The new owner takes over next week, and let me tell you something. They bought this place because we run a tight ship. We don't let just anyone waste our time. Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave. He snapped his fingers at the security guard standing near the entrance. Please escort this gentleman out. David looked around the showroom one last time. Everyone was watching now. Katie looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. A few customers seemed uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. David nodded slowly, putting his phone back in his pocket. You'll be hearing from the new owner very soon, he said quietly, then turned and walked toward the exit, the security guard following a few steps behind him. As the glass doors closed behind him, David heard Derek's voice carrying across the showroom, already back to business as usual, like nothing had happened. David sat in his car for a long moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. His heart was pounding, not from anger exactly, but from the familiar sting of being judged before he even opened his mouth. He'd built a successful software company from nothing, invested wisely in real estate, and had more money than he'd ever need. But none of that mattered when people looked at him and only saw what they wanted to see. He started the engine but didn't drive away immediately. Instead, he watched through the dealership windows as life inside continued like nothing had happened. Derek was already talking to another customer, probably telling some story about how he'd just handled a difficult situation. The other salespeople had gone back to their conversations. Only Katie stood alone, staring at her shoes. David pulled out his phone and opened his notes app. He started typing everything he remembered. The time he arrived, how long he was ignored, the exact words Derek used, the way the other staff members acted. He took screenshots of the dealership's website, their customer service policy that promised respectful treatment for every guest. The irony wasn't lost on him. His phone buzzed. It was his lawyer, Richard, probably calling about the final paperwork for the dealership purchase. David let it go to voicemail. He wasn't ready to talk about it yet. He needed to think. The drive home took 30 minutes, but David barely remembered it. His mind kept replaying the scene. He'd dealt with discrimination before plenty of times. The retail workers who followed him around stores. The real estate agents who suddenly had no available properties. The restaurant host who always had a table in the back, never by the windows. Each time hurt, but you learned to push through it, to prove yourself despite the obstacles. But this felt different. This wasn't just about him anymore. He owned that dealership now. Those were his employees treating customers like that. And if Derek did this to him, how many others had experienced the same treatment? How much business had they lost? How many good people had walked away feeling exactly how David felt right now? When he got home, David went straight to his office. He'd bought the dealership 3 weeks ago after the previous owner, an elderly man named Mr. Morrison, decided to retire. The sale had been smooth, all done through lawyers and accountants. David had never actually visited the location in person, relying instead on financial reports and inspection records. Now he realized that was a mistake. He opened his laptop and pulled up every file related to Prestige Motors. There were spreadsheets showing sales numbers, inventory reports, employee records. Everything looked good on paper. Great even. The dealership had been profitable for years. But numbers didn't tell the whole story. David started digging deeper. He searched for the dealership name online and found their social media pages. Most reviews were positive, praising specific salespeople or the quality of vehicles. But as he scrolled further, patterns started emerging. Several reviews mentioned feeling unwelcome. One person wrote about being ignored for 40 minutes. Another described a manager who was rude and dismissive. 3 different reviews specifically mentioned Derek Palmer by name, and none of them were flattering. He found the dealership's employee page on a job review website. Current and former employees could leave anonymous feedback. David's stomach sank as he read through them. Toxic management. Favoritism runs wild. Good luck if you don't fit the mold. One former salesperson wrote, I left after 6 months because I couldn't stand watching how certain customers were treated. Management encourages profiling even if they won't admit it. David leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. This was worse than he thought. This wasn't just Derek having a bad day. This was a culture problem, something that had been allowed to grow and fester for years. His phone rang again. Richard, his lawyer, trying for the second time. David answered. Hey, sorry I missed your call earlier, David said. No problem. I was just checking in about the ownership transition. Everything's set for Monday. You'll officially take over, meet the staff, all that fun stuff. Excited? David let out a long breath. Richard, I need you to pull something for me. All the legal files from the purchase, specifically any complaints, lawsuits, or settlements involving the dealership over the past 5 years. There was a pause on the other end. That's already in the disclosure documents we reviewed. Why is something wrong? Just humor me. I want everything, even the small stuff that got settled quietly. All right, I'll have my assistant send it over within the hour. David, what's going on? I'll explain Monday. But Richard, I might need you there when I go in. This could get complicated. After hanging up, David spent the next hour searching through public records. He found 3 formal complaints filed with the state's Civil Rights Division, all involving Prestige Motors, all within the last 4 years. 2 had been settled out of court. The details were sealed, but the fact they existed at all told him plenty. His email pinged. Richard's assistant had sent the legal files. David opened the folder and started reading. What he found made him angry all over again, but this time it was a different kind of anger. A focused one. There were 8 settlements total. 8 times the dealership had paid money to make discrimination complaints go away. 8 people who'd been treated poorly, and instead of fixing the problem, Mr. Morrison had just written checks and buried it. Derek's name appeared in 6 of those cases. David's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, this is Katie from the dealership. I got your number from the visitor log, hope that's okay. I just wanted to apologize for what happened today. That wasn't right. I'm really sorry. David stared at the message. Here was someone who saw what happened and actually cared enough to reach out. He typed back, thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. Would you be willing to meet for coffee tomorrow? I'd like to ask you some questions about working there. Her response came quickly. Yes, absolutely. I've been thinking about quitting anyway. There's a lot you should probably know. David set his phone down and looked at all the documents spread across his desk. Financial reports, legal settlements, employee complaints, reviews. The picture was crystal clear now. He'd bought a dealership that was rotten from the inside, held together by people too afraid to speak up and a manager who thought he was untouchable. Well, Derek was about to learn something important. David hadn't gotten where he was by backing down from problems. And this problem? This one was personal. He opened a new document on his computer and started making a list. Everything he needed to do Monday morning. Everything that needed to change. By the time he finished, it was after midnight, but David felt more focused than he had in months. Monday was going to be very interesting. Saturday morning came too quickly. David had barely slept, his mind racing with everything he'd discovered about Prestige Motors. He grabbed his coffee and headed to the small cafe where he'd agreed to meet Katie. The place was quiet, just a few early risers scattered among the tables. Katie was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She looked different without her work uniform, younger somehow and definitely more relaxed. When she saw David, she gave a small wave. Thanks for coming, David said, sliding into the seat across from her. I really appreciate you reaching out. Katie nodded, but her eyes were cautious. I almost didn't. I mean, I don't even know you. But what happened yesterday has been eating at me. It wasn't the first time I've seen Derek do something like that, and I just couldn't stay quiet anymore. How long have you worked there? David asked. About 8 months. I needed a job after college, and car sales seemed like it could be good money. And it is when Derek actually lets you work with customers. She took a sip of her tea, gathering her thoughts. Look, I don't want to trash talk my boss, but you seem like a decent person, and what he did to you was wrong on so many levels. David leaned forward. Katie, I'm not just some random customer. There's something you should know. Over the next few minutes, David explained everything. Who he was. That he'd bought the dealership. that he was officially taking over on Monday. Katie's eyes grew wider with each revelation. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Derek kicked out his own boss." "He didn't know," David said. "But that's actually the point. He treated me that way because of how I looked, not because of anything I did. And I need to know, is this normal there? Am I the only one who's experienced this?" Katie shook her head slowly. "No, not even close. There's this unwritten rule at the dealership. Derek's been there for 8 years, and he's built this whole system around judging customers the second they walk in. He calls it qualifying leads, but really it's just profiling people." She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. "I started keeping track about 3 months ago just for my own records. I documented 12 separate incidents where Derek or some of the senior salespeople dismissed customers based on appearance, and those are just the ones I personally witnessed." David felt his jaw tighten as Katie described each incident. An elderly woman told she probably couldn't afford the maintenance costs. A young couple in casual clothes assumed to be joyriding. A man with tattoos followed by security. Each story made David angrier, but he stayed quiet and let Katie talk. "The worst part is some of those people were actually ready to buy," Katie continued. "I know because a few of them came back when Derek wasn't there, and I helped them. I sold a $70,000 SUV to a guy Derek had completely blown off the week before. The customer told me he almost went to a different dealership because of how he was treated the first time." "Why didn't anyone report this?" David asked. Katie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "To who Derek runs everything. He's tight with Mr. Morrison, or at least he was. The HR person reports directly to Derek. And honestly, most of the sales team has been there longer than me. They're used to how things work. Some of them even think Derek's way is smart, like he's protecting their time by weeding out bad customers." "What about you? Why did you stay?" "Student loans," Katie said simply. "I need the income. And I kept telling myself that maybe I could make a difference from the inside, you know? Help the customers Derek ignored. But it's exhausting, and I've been looking for other jobs anyway." David pulled out his laptop. "Can you tell me about the other employees? Who's good? Who follows Derek's lead? I need to understand what I'm walking into Monday." For the next hour, Katie gave David a complete picture of the dealership's culture. She talked about Tom, the veteran salesman who'd been there 15 years and basically worshipped Derek. About Lisa, who was good at her job but stayed quiet to keep her position. About the finance manager who processed everything by the book, but turned a blind eye to the showroom drama. And about the few people like herself who genuinely cared about treating customers right but felt powerless to change anything. "There's one more thing," Katie said, her voice dropping. "About 2 months ago, a family came in. Dad, mom, 2 kids. They were looking at minivans. Nice people. Had their financing already approved from their bank. Derek took one look at them and decided they were wasting his time. He literally told them the dealership was closing early for inventory, which was a complete lie. They left, confused, and I felt sick about it." "Did you say anything?" David asked. "I tried. I went to Derek's office after and told him they had pre-approved financing. You know what he said? 'Katie, you're too soft for this business. Not everyone who walks in here deserves our time. Learn to read people better.' I almost quit that day." David closed his laptop and looked at Katie directly. "Here's what's going to happen Monday. I'm taking over officially. Derek doesn't know who I am yet, and I'm going to make sure the whole staff is there when I introduce myself." "It's not going to be pretty." Katie's eyes widened. "You're going to fire him." "I'm going to do what should have been done years ago," David said. "But I need good people to help me rebuild that place into what it should be. Would you be interested in staying on?" "I'm going to need people I can trust." Katie sat back, processing everything. "What about the others? The ones who've been following Derek's lead?" "They'll get a choice," David said. "Change or leave. I'm implementing new policies, new training, a new culture from the ground up. Anyone who can't get on board with treating every customer with respect won't have a place there anymore." "Then yes," Katie said, a small smile finally appearing. "I'm in. I've wanted to work at a place I could be proud of. Maybe this is my chance." They talked for another 30 minutes, planning out Monday's approach. Katie shared insights about dealership operations that David hadn't learned from any financial report. By the time they left the cafe, David felt more prepared than ever. Sunday was a blur of phone calls and preparation. David spoke with Richard, his lawyer, who agreed to be present Monday morning. He contacted the dealership's HR director, insisting on a mandatory all-staff meeting first thing. He reviewed employment contracts and company policies, making notes of what needed to change immediately. That night, David laid out his best suit. Tomorrow, everyone at Prestige Motors would learn exactly who their new owner was. And Derek Palmer was about to have the worst Monday of his life. David set his alarm and tried to sleep, but his mind kept racing. This wasn't just about revenge for what happened to him. This was bigger. This was about creating the kind of workplace and business that should exist, where people were judged by their character and actions, not their appearance, where employees could be proud of where they worked. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and unusual traffic. David sat in the parking lot of Prestige Motors at 7:30, a full hour before the dealership opened. His hands were steady on the steering wheel, but his heart was racing. Today would change everything. Richard pulled up in his Mercedes a few minutes later, briefcase in hand. He walked over to David's car and tapped on the window. "Ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," David replied, stepping out. Today he wore his navy blue suit, the one he saved for important business meetings. His shoes were polished, his tie perfectly straight. He wanted to look exactly like what he was, the owner. They walked to the entrance together. The receptionist, an older woman named Patricia, looked up in surprise. "I'm sorry, we don't open until 8:30. "I know," David said calmly. "I'm David Chen, the new owner. This is my attorney, Richard Brown. We're here for the staff meeting." Patricia's mouth opened slightly, then closed. She recovered quickly, standing up to shake his hand. "Of course, Mr. Chen. Welcome. Let me unlock the conference room for you." As they walked through the showroom, David noticed everything looked different from this side of the glass. The cars gleamed under the lights. Everything was spotless, perfect. But he knew what lay beneath that polished surface. By 8:15, employees started arriving. Tom, the veteran salesman, strutted in wearing an expensive watch. Lisa came next, checking her phone. Katie arrived and caught David's eye, giving him a subtle nod of encouragement. By 8:25, 12 staff members had gathered in the conference room, whispering amongst themselves about the surprise meeting. Derek arrived at 8:28, right before the dealership opened. He was in high spirits, laughing at something on his phone as he walked in. When Patricia told him about the meeting, his expression shifted to mild annoyance. "A meeting? Now? I've got customers coming in at 9, he complained, but headed toward the conference room anyway. David watched from the doorway as Derek entered, still looking at his phone. When Derek finally glanced up and saw David standing at the head of the table in a suit, confusion flickered across his face. Just confusion, nothing more. He didn't recognize him. "Morning, everyone," Derek said loudly, taking a seat near the front. "Anyone know what this is about?" "You're about to find out," Richard said quietly. David walked to the front of the room and stood beside a projection screen. All eyes turned to him. Katie sat in the back, her hands folded on the table. Derek leaned back in his chair, looking mildly interested but mostly impatient. "Good morning," David began. "For those who don't know me, my name is David Chen. As of today, I am the official owner of Prestige Motors." The room erupted in whispers. Several people sat up straighter. Lisa put down her phone. Tom's confident expression faltered. And Derek finally looked at David's face, really looked, and the color started draining from his cheeks. "Some of you may recognize me," David continued, his eyes landing on Derek. "I was here Friday afternoon. I came in as a customer, interested in purchasing a vehicle. I was ignored for 15 minutes. When someone finally acknowledged me, I was judged based on my appearance and told I should shop somewhere else. Then I was asked to leave." You could hear a pin drop in that room. Derek had gone completely pale. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. David pulled out a remote and clicked it. The screen behind him lit up with a spreadsheet. "Over the weekend, I did some research into this dealership's operations. What I found was disturbing. In the past 4 years, there have been 8 settled discrimination complaints against this business. 8 people who felt they were treated unfairly based on their race, age, or appearance. 8 legal settlements that cost this company over $300,000. He clicked again. Customer reviews appeared on the screen, the negative ones highlighted. I found dozens of reviews describing experiences similar to mine. Customers who felt unwelcome, judged, dismissed. And one name appeared repeatedly in these complaints. Derek's name was now highlighted on the screen in red. Several employees turned to look at him. He sat frozen, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "Mr. Palmer," David said, his voice calm but firm, "can you explain your customer service philosophy to everyone here?" Derek swallowed hard. Look, there's been a misunderstanding. Friday I didn't realize that I was the owner," David interrupted. "You're right. You didn't know. But here's the thing, Derek. It shouldn't matter who I am. Every person who walks through those doors deserves respect. Every single one. Whether they're buying a car or just looking. Whether they're dressed in a suit or in jeans. Whether they're young or old, black or white, rich or poor, everyone." "I was just trying to be efficient," Derek stammered. "Not everyone who comes in is a serious buyer. I was protecting the team's time." "You were profiling customers," David said flatly. "And it cost this dealership money, reputation, and good people." "Katie, can you stand up, please?" Katie stood, looking nervous but determined. "Katie has been here 8 months," David said. "In that time, she documented multiple incidents of customers being dismissed or treated poorly based on appearance. She also tracked that several of those customers were ready to buy and ended up purchasing elsewhere." "Derek, how much commission did this dealership lose because of your judgment calls?" Derek had no answer. He sat there speechless, while the other employees stared at him with expressions ranging from shock to anger to resignation. Richard stepped forward and placed a folder on the table in front of Derek. "Mr. Palmer, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Cause violation of company non-discrimination policies, hostile work environment, and substantial financial damages to the business through discriminatory practices." "You can't do this," Derek said, finding his voice. "I've been here 8 years. I built this place, Mr. Morrison." "Mr. Morrison is retired," David said. "And frankly, he should have dealt with this years ago. But he didn't, so I am. You have 1 hour to clear out your personal belongings. Security will escort you out." Derek looked around the room, perhaps expecting support from his colleagues. Tom looked down at the table. Lisa studied her hands. Nobody spoke up. Finally, Derek stood, his face red with humiliation and anger. "This is garbage," he muttered. "I was good at my job." "You were good at sales," David corrected. "But that doesn't excuse discrimination. Being good at one thing doesn't give you permission to be terrible at treating people with basic human decency." The security guard, the same one who'd followed David to the door on Friday, appeared at the conference room entrance. Derek shot David one last angry look before walking out, the guard following closely behind. After the door closed, David turned back to the remaining staff. "I know this is uncomfortable. Change always is. But let me be clear about something. This dealership is going to operate differently from now on. We're going to treat every customer with respect. We're going to create an environment where employees feel safe speaking up when something's wrong, and anyone who can't get on board with that won't be here." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm not looking to fire everyone. I'm looking to build something better. But I need your help to do it. Katie, you're now the interim sales manager. We'll discuss your new responsibilities after this meeting." Katie's eyes went wide, but she nodded. "The rest of you have a choice to make. Stay and be part of building something you can be proud of, or leave. Either way, things are changing today." David gathered his materials as the staff filed out, some looking stunned, others thoughtful, a few actually smiling. Through the window, he could see Derek walking across the parking lot, a cardboard box in his hands. It was done. The hard part was over. Now came the even harder part, rebuilding. The first week after Derek's departure was chaos. 3 salespeople quit within 2 days, including Tom, who said he didn't want to work under new management that doesn't understand the business. David let them go without argument. If they couldn't accept the changes, they weren't the right people to build a new culture with anyway. Katie stepped into her new role as sales manager with nervous energy. David spent hours with her, going over his vision for the dealership. They rewrote the customer service guidelines together, making respect and inclusion the foundation of every policy. No more judging customers at the door. No more profiling based on appearance. Everyone who walked in would be treated like they belonged there. By the second week, David brought in a consultant named Dr. Helen Rodriguez to conduct mandatory training for all staff. She was a specialist in workplace diversity and unconscious bias, Some employees rolled their eyes when they heard about it, but David made it clear this wasn't optional. "I know some of you think this is unnecessary," David said at the start of the first training session. "But here's the reality. We lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in settlements because we didn't do this sooner. More importantly, we hurt people. We made customers feel unwelcome in a place where they were ready to spend their hard-earned money. That ends now." Dr. Rodriguez's training was eye-opening. She had employees participate in exercises that showed their own hidden biases. Lisa, who'd been quiet since Derek left, actually broke down in tears during one session. "I never thought of myself as someone who judged people," she admitted. "But looking back at some of my interactions, I can see how my assumptions affected how I treated customers." "I'm so sorry." David appreciated her honesty. "The point isn't to make anyone feel guilty," he told the group. "It's to make us aware so we can do better. We all have biases. The question is what we do when we recognize them." The third week brought the first real test. A young couple walked into the showroom, both covered in tattoos, wearing ripped jeans and band t-shirts. David watched from his office as the staff reacted. He could see the old instincts kicking in for some of them, that moment of hesitation, but Katie walked right up to them with a genuine smile. "Welcome to Prestige Motors," she said warmly. "I'm Katie. What brings you in today?" David couldn't hear the conversation, but he saw Katie spending time with them, showing them different models and laughing at something the young man said. An hour later, they were in the finance office. They bought a $45,000 sedan, paying cash. As they left, David overheard the young woman say to her partner, "See? I told you this place would be different than the last dealership." Katie caught David's eye and grinned. This was what success looked like. By the end of the first month, word had started spreading in the community. A local newspaper did a story about the dealership's transformation, focusing on David's commitment to inclusive business practices. The story mentioned that David himself had experienced discrimination at the dealership before becoming owner, though he kept the details minimal. He didn't want this to be about revenge. He wanted it to be about progress. The article brought unexpected results. Several people reached out to David, sharing their own stories of being mistreated at Prestige Motors over the years. Each story broke David's heart a little more, but it also strengthened his resolve. He personally called several of them, apologized for their experiences, and invited them back to give the dealership another chance. One of those people was Mr. Jackson, a retired teacher who'd been dismissed by Derek 2 years earlier. "I saved for 3 years to buy a nice car for my retirement," Mr. Jackson told David over the phone. "When I went to your dealership, the manager took one look at me and assumed I couldn't afford anything. I ended up buying from a dealership 30 miles away. It wasn't about the car anymore. It was about dignity." David invited Mr. Jackson to the dealership personally. He spent 2 hours with him, showing him the new inventory, explaining all the changes that had been made. Mr. Jackson didn't buy that day, but he shook David's hand and said, "You're doing something important here. Thank you." 3 months after taking over, David looked at the numbers. Sales were up 18%. Customer satisfaction scores had doubled. The dealership had received over 55-star reviews in just 3 months, many specifically mentioning the welcoming atmosphere and respectful staff. Even more impressive, employee satisfaction was at an all-time high. Katie had recruited 3 new salespeople, all diverse candidates who brought fresh perspectives to the team. But the moment that meant the most to David came on a random Tuesday afternoon. He was walking through the showroom when he saw an elderly black woman standing alone near a luxury SUV. Without thinking, 3 different salespeople approached her at the same time, all eager to help. She looked delighted by the attention. Lisa ended up working with her. David watched as Lisa patiently answered every question, never once suggesting the customer couldn't afford the vehicle or should look at something cheaper. 2 hours later, the woman drove off in a brand new SUV, beaming with pride. Lisa came to David's office afterward. "That felt good," she said simply. "Really good. She told me she'd been nervous about coming here because of things she'd heard about the old management. She said she almost didn't come in, but her daughter convinced her things had changed." "They have changed," David said. "And that's because of people like you being willing to grow and learn." David stood at the showroom window that evening after everyone had gone home, looking at the rows of cars reflecting the sunset. He thought about that day he'd been kicked out, how angry and hurt he'd felt. Part of him was glad it happened, though. If Derek had treated him well that day, David might never have discovered the problems. He might have let the toxic culture continue. Instead, he'd built something better. A place where everyone was welcome, where employees were proud of where they worked, where customers felt respected regardless of how they looked or where they came from. His phone buzzed with a text from Katie. Just got a message from that couple with the tattoos. They referred 3 of their friends to us. All 3 came in today. I think we're onto something good here. David smiled and typed back. We definitely are. He locked up the dealership and walked to his car, the same modest Honda he'd driven that first day. He could afford any car on the lot now, but this one reminded him of something important. Your worth isn't determined by what you drive or what you wear. It's determined by how you treat people and what you build. As David drove home, he passed another car dealership with bright lights and big sale signs. He wondered about their culture, about how they treated customers who didn't fit their expectations. Maybe his example would inspire other business owners to look at their own practices. Change had to start somewhere. For Prestige Motors, it started with one man being judged unfairly and deciding to turn that pain into purpose, and that made all the difference.